I've spent my career studying the way living things talk to each other. 42 languages, 11 alien dialects, 3 communication systems that don't use sound at all. I wrote my doctoral thesis on the idea that language is not just a tool for sharing information. It's the architecture of how a mind understands reality. Change the language and you change the thought. Change the thought and you change everything. The Vael Commander who captured me didn't know any of that, but she figured it out pretty quickly. My name is Dr. Owen Marsh, Senior Linguist, Terran Deep Contact Division. I was aboard the research vessel Meridian when she drifted across the boundary line into Vael-controlled space. Navigation error. Nobody's fault. The kind of thing that happens when you're running surveys in poorly mapped territory and the charts are 3 years out of date. The Vael intercepted us within the hour. The crew of 6 were taken aboard a Vael warship called, as best as I could later translate it, something like the Unyielding Clarity, which is a name that tells you a great deal about Vael culture if you know how to listen. My crewmates were held separately. I was taken to a room with a table, 2 seats, and a Vael female who introduced herself, eventually, as Commander Ara. She wanted to know how humans think. I decided to tell her. The first session lasted 4 hours. It was not pleasant, but it wasn't violent. The Vael, I would learn, considered physical coercion a sign of intellectual failure. If you couldn't get what you needed through questioning, the problem was with your questions. Commander Ara's questions were good. She had a translation device, crude, military grade, the kind that handles basic operational vocabulary and falls apart on anything nuanced, and she used it with the frustrated efficiency of someone who knows their tool isn't good enough for the job. She would ask something, the device would produce a mangled approximation in human standard. I would answer. The device would mangle my answer back into Vael, and she would study me with those split pupil, amber eyes, trying to determine how much had been lost in transit. A lot. The answer was always a lot. By the end of the first hour, I had stopped using the device entirely. This surprised her. I could tell, not because her expression changed dramatically. Vael faces are more controlled than human ones, but because her bioluminescent markings shifted, a pattern I hadn't seen before. Later, I would learn it indicated heightened attention. At the time, I just knew something had changed. "You are attempting to speak Vael," she said through the device. The translation was flat and mechanical, but the observation was accurate. "Attempting," I agreed, in Vael. My pronunciation was almost certainly terrible, but the word was correct. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned off the translation device, and the real conversation began. What followed over the next 6 days was the most intense linguistic immersion of my professional life. Commander Ara, it turned out, had been studying human language for 2 years. Academically, from recordings and intercepted communications, she had significant vocabulary and almost no practical experience using it. I had the opposite problem. We were, in the most literal sense, exactly what the other needed. The sessions moved from interrogation to something else so gradually that I'm not sure either of us noticed the transition. She would say a Vael word, I would find the human equivalent or explain why there wasn't one. I would say a human word, she would do the same. In between, we argued about translation, about meaning, about whether a concept that existed in one language but not the other was a gap in vocabulary or a gap in understanding. She thought the human word for home was imprecise. I thought the Vael word for enemy was doing too much work. We were both right. On the third day, she asked me what humans were afraid of. Not tactically, not what weapons or enemies or strategic situations, but fundamentally, what was the fear underneath all the other fears? I thought about it for a long time. Being forgotten, I said finally. Humans are afraid that nothing they do will last, that they'll live and die, and the universe will continue exactly as if they were never here. She processed that. Her markings moved in the pattern I'd come to associate with deep consideration. And what do humans do about that fear? She asked. We make things, I said. Art, children, buildings, stories. We try to leave marks. We try to matter. Another long pause. We have the same fear, she said quietly. We call it the silent ending. We do not speak of it often. It was the first moment I understood that the war between our species was not inevitable. It was just two groups of people who were afraid of the same things and had never found a way to say so. By day 4, Commander Ara had stopped treating me like a prisoner. Not officially, I was still confined to my quarters when we weren't in session. Still had no access to comms, still had no idea what was happening to my crewmates. But in the room with the table, something had shifted. She brought food, Vael food, which is an experience I won't describe in detail except to say that it was clearly offered as a gesture, and I ate it as one. She stopped sitting across from me and started sitting beside me, both of us facing the holographic display where we built our shared vocabulary word by word. She asked me once why I wasn't trying to escape. I told her I didn't want to. Not yet. You are a strange human, she said. You are a strange Vael, I said. Her markings did something I hadn't seen before. A quick, rippling pattern that started at her jaw and moved upward. It took me 2 more days to identify it with certainty. It was the Vael equivalent of a laugh. On day 5, she told me about the dead zone. It came up obliquely. We were discussing navigation, charted versus uncharted space, the places both sides avoided for reasons that had accumulated over generations until nobody remembered the original reason anymore. She mentioned a region at the edge of neutral space, a name in Vael that translated roughly as the place of no return. Neither Vael nor human ships went there. The few that had tried hadn't come back. What's there? I asked. She didn't know. Nobody did. That was precisely the point. I filed away in the back of my mind the way you file things that feel significant without knowing why. A dead zone at the edge of neutral space. Nobody goes there. Nobody comes back. At the time, I thought it was just an interesting detail. I had no way of knowing someone would go there eventually and what they would find, but that's another story for someone else. On day 6, Commander Ara came to this session later than usual. Her markings were subdued. The pattern I'd learned meant she was carrying something difficult. She sat down, didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, in careful human standard, "My command has ordered the release of your crew. You will be returned to human space within the day." I nodded, waited. There was clearly more. "There is debate," she said, switching back to Vael because she had more precision there, "about whether to release you. You have learned things about our language, about our—" She paused, searching. "Our interior, our fears, what we call the silent ending. Some believe this is a strategic risk." "And you?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. Her markings cycled through several patterns I couldn't fully read. "I believe," she said slowly, "that the risk of you not returning is greater than the risk of you going home." I didn't understand immediately. The risk of me not returning? "You are," she said, and paused again, choosing very carefully, "the first human I have spoken to. The first human I have—" Another pause, the markings shifting. "Understood. If you do not return, I will not know if another conversation is possible. I will not know if what happened in this room was real or—" She searched for the word. "Exceptional." I looked at her for a long moment. "It was real," I said, "in Vael. Precisely, without approximation. In a sentence, I had enough vocabulary to construct correctly." Her markings went still. Then she reached across the table and placed one finger on the holographic display between us, pulling up a blank input field. She typed a single word in Vael script. Then she looked at me. I typed the equivalent beside it. We both looked at what was on the screen between us. 2 scripts, 1 word. Peace. My crew and I were returned to human space 6 hours later, aboard a Vael courier that deposited us at the edge of the boundary line and was gone before we could hail it. The debrief at command took 2 weeks. They were very interested in everything I'd observed, everything I'd learned, every detail of the unyielding Clarity and its crew and its commander. I told them most of it. I kept some of it. Not for strategic reasons, not because I thought it would compromise anything, but because some things are between 2 people and don't belong to anyone else. What was her expression in the last moment before the airlock closed? What the word looked like on the screen between us? In 2 scripts? In a room where 2 people had spent 6 days building something out of nothing? I've spent my career on the idea that language is the architecture of how a mind understands reality. Commander Ara taught me the other half of that sometimes the most important thing 2 minds can do is find the word they share. Not the words that divide, not the words that have no translation, the one word in any language that means the same thing. We found ours on day 6 in a room on Vael warship called the Unyielding Clarity. I hope she still has it on her screen somewhere. I still have mine.